within occupied territory on the far left coast. You're listening to On the Move with Mack, Worley III.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and members of the Mack Pack. Great to be back with you. I am Mack Worley, and this is On the Move, the show that attempts to inspire you to stand up for your rights. Today, I'm really excited about today's show. I've got a lot of information that I want to cover. The date is October 12th, 2014, and we have a good show in store for you. With that said, we're going to be talking about a few different topics today, and as usual, you can always call in with your own. First, today, I would like to talk about the upcoming vote on two initiative ballots. One of them is I-594 that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and the next one is I-591. You may be less familiar with that, but I think it's something that we need to discuss. Then I would also like to talk to you guys today about the concept of state sovereignty and what that actually means. A lot of people don't really even think about it or even know what exactly state sovereignty is. So I want to talk about that. Lastly, I'd like to do a historical deep dive, if we have time here, on the revolutionary era debate concerning slavery, which ultimately led up to the Civil War. So I want to cover that. It's some information that I've been researching myself and really contemplating, doing some soul searching on, and trying to figure out, where our founders were coming from and what I would have done if I was in their position. So I challenge you guys to listen to this portion of the broadcast with that, and while you're listening, critically think about what you would do if you were in that situation without the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. Okay. So anyway, like I said, I want to hear from you guys today as well, as usual. So feel free to give us a call. The number to the show is 619-924-0986. Again, that's 619-924-0986. The Mack Pack phone lines are open, so light them up, guys. And if you have any topics that you'd like to discuss that's not on the docket for today, feel free to bring it up. Anything you'd like to discuss is on the table. You can also join the conversation today by emailing us at talk@onthemoveshow.com. And don't forget to check us out here at blogtalkradio.com/onthemoveshow. You can follow us. That way you can keep up to date on every episode that we have coming up and any kind of emergency podcast that we have that I feel that I need to get some information out to you guys. It's very likely that in the near future we're going to be having some kind of no-notice broadcast. So follow us here at blogtalkradio.com/onthemoveshow to get information on those kind of shows. Also, you can check us out at our website, onthemoveshow.com. You can like us on Facebook, facebook.com/onthemoveshow. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/onthemoveshow, and follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/onthemoveshow or at onthemoveshow. Anyway, as usual, you guys can check out our store if you're interested. We have a shop link on our homepage at onthemoveshow.com. Hundreds of products for sale on there. Lots of different stuff. Original T-shirts with original designs. It's got freeze-dried food that I have on there for you guys. Books that I recommend reading, bumper stickers, and so much more. And, first and foremost, I just want to say thanks to everyone who's already purchased stuff on our store. It goes a long way to helping make the podcast bigger and better. So thank you so much. And for those of you who are going to in the future or thinking about it, thanks again. I really do appreciate that. We use that money to get better equipment like mixing desks and microphones and camera equipment and things like that, so we can do it and make a better, more professional podcast and YouTube channel for you guys. So the content that I'm creating is stuff that is going to be used for your entertainment, your education, things like that. So feel free to get involved that way. So, as usual, at the beginning of every show, I try to give you guys a little bit of an update on what's going on here and some of the things that's going on in my life specifically. So this week, I posted a new video on our YouTube channel. This one is from the May Day protest that I attended back in May 1st to be exact. And I was down in Portland, Oregon for this protest. So I'm there covering these, communist, socialist, anarchist, Marxists, all this stuff. I'm covering the event and basically trying to get a feel for what's going on down there. And I happened to stumble across this tactical SWAT unit that was set up, and they were strategically placed about 2 blocks away from the protest. And anyway, so what they're doing is they're basically skirting alongside about 2 blocks away, parallel to the protesters, and they're just following alongside, and they're positioned in a way that they can quickly respond. And most of these protesters don't even know that these guys are there. So anyway, like I said, I stumbled across this, and I walked up and I spoke to one of the officers, and I got some pretty interesting responses. In fact, there was an individual who was there. He's actually the one that showed me where these guys were. He saw me with my camera, and he said, "Hey, do you want to see something? This is pretty crazy. There's a SWAT unit over here. Come take a look." And him and we got to talking. He was an Iraqi veteran, and he was talking about, the growing police state and some of his concerns regarding that, and, the similarities that he sees here at home compared to what he saw abroad when he was serving overseas. And, this is why he brought it to my attention. He wanted somebody with a camera to see it. He didn't see anybody over there. They were kind of, creeping out there, and nobody was aware of them being there. So anyway, him and we walked up to the police, and we filmed them for a while, and then we walked up and we started talking with one of the guys there, and we got some pretty good conversation with them. If you guys are interested, please feel free to check out the video. It's on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/OnTheMoveShow, and as usual, you can always subscribe to get future videos. We have new content coming out all the time, so feel free to subscribe for all of that. Anyway, now it's time for my favorite part of the show, and we like to call it the Weekly Defender.
And now it's time for Weekly Defender. You have the right to defend your life, the right to defend your family, and the right to defend your freedom.
All right, this is a segment of the show where I report about armed citizens in the news who have used their firearms to defend their family, their property, and or themselves. Our first Weekly Defender we found on the Post periodical in San Fernando, California. A man on federal probation entered a home in Van Nuys, I can't say that word, N-U-Y-S, I'm guessing that's News, Van Nuys, California. And anyway, he attacked the homeowner. The homeowner retrieved a handgun and shot the criminal, halting the altercation. Following a hospitalization to treat the gunshot wound, the intruder was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. And this happened on the 16th of September. Our next Weekly Defender we found on Ozarks 1st in Springfield, Missouri. An armed man entered a family pharmacy in Taney County, Missouri, and ordered an employee to give him pills. One of the store's employees responded by retrieving a gun and firing at the robber, striking him and causing him to flee. The criminal was captured by police a short time later. Following the incident, Taney County Sheriff Jimmy Russell told a media outlet, "As long as you've got store owners or store employees who are well-trained and proficient with firearms, more power to them." By the way, this happened on the 30th of September. I love it when I see law enforcement officers where they're basically, saying more power to citizens. Obviously this kind of power rests with the citizens first and foremost, and I think it's really important that we support sheriffs who are constitutionalists in this regard, who support the right of the citizens to keep and bear arms. It speaks volumes about these kind of guys. And Jimmy Russell, I don't know if any of you are out there in Springfield, Missouri, in Taney County, but please support this guy. I mean, he's obviously a constitutionalist. He believes in your right to keep and bear arms, and I'm all about this kind of stuff. So anyway, we love hearing about how law-abiding citizens use their firearms to protect themselves. You have a right to defend your life. You have a right to defend your family, and you have a right to defend your freedom. We at On The Move, we support your rights, and if you have a story about how you lawfully defended yourself or you would like to comment on one of these stories, we would love to hear from you. Give us a call. The number to the show is 619-924-0986, or you can email the show at talk@onthemoveshow.com. Anyway, at this point, we're going to go ahead and cut to a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to enter into the next segment of the show. We like to call it the Mack Attack. If you guys would like to tune in here and give us your 2 cents on anything that we're going to cover or anything that we've already covered, feel free, give us a call. Number to the show, 619-924-0986. All right, we will be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Support On The Move. Help us make this podcast bigger and better. You can do this by going to our store and purchasing one of our hundreds of products. All designs are original and made for patriots like you. Just go to cafepress.com/onthemoveshow. We appreciate your support. Hi, I'm Latasha Worley, and I work with candidates to creatively and effectively communicate their message to voters. I offer professional graphic design services from yard signs to flyers, from logos to vehicle magnets. Email me today at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LAGOSHA Worley@gmail.com for a quote on items for your campaign.
Broadcasting from deep within occupied territory on the far left coast. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III. Stand up, speak out, and get on the move. And now your host, Mack Worley III.
And we're back. I appreciate y'all sticking with us. Okay, so when we last left, we did our weekly Defender. We were talking about all sorts of other shenanigans and all of that. We're going to move into the meat of the show, and this segment, it's one of my favorites. We like to call it the Mack Attack, and it's basically where I give you guys my take on events that are going on, some of them that are outrageous, and this one in particular I think is rather important. It deals with some local initiative ballots that are going on, and we're going to deep dive into all of this. So here we go.
It's time for the Mack Attack!
All right, so I want to take a moment to talk about these two local initiatives that are going on that are going to be voted on in the upcoming election. You know, if you live in Washington State like me, you probably already know about I-594. Especially if you're listening to the show, I'm positive that most of my audience is already fully aware of I-594. Although we're going to cover some of the stuff about that that I have an issue with, and I believe that you guys will have an issue with as well. You may also already be aware of I-591 as well, not to be confused with 594. Basically, let me give you the breakdown here. 594 is very, very restrictive. It's calling for background checks anytime that a firearm transfers possession, not ownership, possession. So let's say I want to show you one of my guns. You know, you're my buddy. You come over to my house, and I'm like, hey, check out this new gun I got. And you're like, oh, can I hold it? According to I-594, in order for you to hold it, I would have to get a background check on you. Even though you're not taking ownership of it, you're just going to be holding it for a few seconds. Just the transfer of possession requires a background check. And if you don't do that, according to I-594, that would be a felony. And then if you go to give that gun back to me, we need another background check. All right? So, you know, this is pretty ridiculous. Obviously, you know, it's a bunch of red tape and additional paperwork that needs to be done, and it makes it basically just a pain in the butt for law-abiding citizens. People who are following the law anyway, they're of no threat to society, and you know, it's just more red tape, more of a hassle for people who aren't a threat in the first place. All right, but more importantly, it also, each infraction impacts upon itself. So what I mean is, it's basically stacking felonies. All right, so if I hand it to you and you hand it back to me, that's two felonies that we just did right there. It's not just one, it's two. So, you know, I want to take a few moments to talk about both of these initiatives here and why I personally am going to be voting against both, and I would recommend that you vote against both as well. And if you don't live in Washington State, please pay attention, because this still applies to you, okay? Washington is the test case here. It is the first installment of 594, and it's going to be moving around to every state across the nation. Everywhere they think they can get a foothold, Bloomberg and the anti-gun extremist war machine, they're going to try to put this everywhere in the nation, and Washington is just the first step. They want to see how it's going to go and get a little bit of a legislative practice, so to speak, during this process. So it's really, really important that you guys learn what this is about, understand that it is coming to your state, and that there are ways that you can actually fight against this, and it's by informing people, educating yourself as well. And speaking of educating yourself, I think it's kind of funny because this is an 18-page law. It's full of ridiculous, exemptions and things like that. That it has all these loopholes added into it and things like that. But it's so complex that even the writers of this law don't fully understand it. And those of us who have been taking the time to actually read this thing, every time we take a look at it, it seems different. You can get a different interpretation of this law. So it's extremely critical that we all fight against I-594 and any legislation that's similar to it. All right. So anyway, I-594. It's crazy because of the requirements for background checks. I want to just point out that these background checks aren't actually going to do anything at all to reduce crime. Okay, background checks, for one, I mean, if you want to buy a gun in a store, you already need a background check, and when you do that, you have to go through the NICS system, the Instant Background Check System, the National Criminal Instant Background Check System. So basically, it's not really even instant. It still takes a couple of minutes to do that. But can you imagine a system that's already bogged down, a system that it has already had problems, being overwhelmed with a flood of background check requests? If you imagine every time that somebody buys a gun, all right, that's a lot of times per year that somebody buys a gun. But then now let's compact that on every time that person touches a gun that they don't own, hands a gun to somebody else so that they can see it. If everybody was to follow this law, then this NICS system, this instant background check system, would be flooded to the point of where it could take weeks or months or possibly even years for you to hear back on your background check just to purchase a gun. Let alone, get some target practice in at the range with a gun that you don't own. Maybe you can rent one at the range or something. There's a bunch of places that have things like this. And it also doesn't take into account range safety training. So you go to a range to actually learn how to use a gun before you buy one. They will provide you with a gun at this range. And in order for them to do that, they would have to conduct a background check. Every range across the nation is going to be doing this. We're talking about a massive bogging down of the instant background check system, which it's going to be, they're going to have to change the name. It won't be instant background check anymore. There's no way that they could refer to something that takes months or years as an instant background check system. It's just ridiculous. But moreover to the point here, okay, imagine criminal A, and I've used this analogy before here, and I'm sorry if you guys are tired of hearing it, but it's the most basic way I can explain this. Criminal A steals a gun, all right? Criminal B wants to buy that gun from criminal A in order to use it in a crime. Why would they submit to a background check? They wouldn't. It would not happen. I-594 will literally do nothing at all to stem the flow here of any kind of crimes. The only thing it's going to do is try to discourage law-abiding citizens from asserting their right to keep and bear arms. That's it. That's all it's designed to do. It's not going to make anyone safer. It's not going to make crime rates reduce. It's not going to do anything. In fact, it may actually cause crime to increase because as we've seen from places like Chicago, D.C., California, things like this where they have the strictest gun laws, we see a dramatic increase in crime comparatively to the nation. And you have to ask yourself why. Why do places with the most harshest gun control laws have the most crime? And the answer is the criminals know that they are the only ones with firearms. They know that everyone out there is subject to their will. There's nothing that they can do to defend themselves, so they can just rush in with guns and know that they'll be the only ones with them and they will be unopposed. This is why crime in these places have risen. So, anywhere that we see I-594 go and it passes, we're going to see an increase in crime. We're going to see law-abiding citizens getting disarmed, and most people just giving up because they're just going to think that it's not worth it. All the headache, all the pain, all the hassle of having to go through all these hoops in order to get a firearm. They're just going to give up. And that's what Bloomberg and the anti-gun war machine hope. That's what they want, you to give up. Well, I'm here to tell you, don't give up, don't surrender, and just keep fighting, guys, because I'm telling you, we have to fight this and other legislations like it and be aware that this is going on. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about a Facebook post that I made the other day, and I just want to read it for you guys. You may have read it already, but I think it's important that this information gets out. So anyway, I'm saying vote no on I-591 and I-594, and we're going to cover I-591 in a lot more detail here in a moment. But first, I want to read this letter. So here it goes. Most of you know that I-594 is a bad law that will criminalize all transfers of firearms between individuals. However, please allow me to discuss why I-591 is a bad law. First and foremost, our founders were extremely concerned about centralized governmental power, as discussed in the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, as we saw in the American Civil War, during the American Revolution, and the ratification of the Constitution. Clearly, this issue has been a top concern since the creation of this country. The debate ultimately comes down to states' rights. The 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. This means that if the federal government were to pass a law, every state can oppose that law based on powers of sovereignty in which each state retains as enumerated in the 10th Amendment. So what exactly does that mean? What am I getting at here? If the federal government passed a law requiring all transfers of firearms to have a background check, then that would mean that every state could oppose this law. That is, unless they have a law on their books which requires them to follow a uniform national standard. And I'm referring specifically to I-591. I-591 reads in the second section of it, it says this is adding to the RCW 9.41, and it reads as follows. It is unlawful for any government agency to require background checks on the recipient of a firearm unless a uniform national standard is required. So this statement would appear that it's open for interpretation. And let me break down why I have a problem with this statement. And I've heard other people justifying it. And if you have something that you'd like to say, if you disagree with me on this, I'd love to have a debate with you guys on this. And I know some of you out there are listening. You may not agree with me. Some of you may be in support of 591. And I'd love to have you on. Please give us a call. The number to the show is 619-924-0986. Anyway, I'm going to read this section again and break it down here. And then we'll get back to the letter I wrote here, or the post I made. It is unlawful, meaning it's illegal for any government agency to require background checks on the recipient of a firearm unless a uniform national standard is required. Okay? So meaning it's illegal unless. That unless means that it is lawful. So if you take out the unless and you put an if, replace the unlawful with lawful, it reads, it is lawful for any government agency to require background checks on the recipient if a uniform national standard is required. You see what I mean? You see the difference of that? That is a big difference when you replace it like that. So it's totally lawful for a government agency to require background checks as long as a uniform national standard is required, i.e. a federal law requiring such a standard. This is why I have a problem with I-591, and I'll go back to the letter here. I-591 is supposed to be the answer to a problem that we currently face, which is I-594. I-594 will criminalize, i.e. a felony, the transfer of firearms from person to person, or any transfer for that matter, as I stated above, without a background check. This means every time you want to hand someone a firearm, you need a background check. When they hand it back, you need another one. every time you let your friend shoot your gun at the range, borrow it to go hunting, or just let them hold it, you will need a background check. That is exactly what I-594 is trying to do right now. So it's not a stretch to think that a law similar to I-594 would be tried at the national level. It's not even a stretch to think that it could be passed one day. You know, if a national law were passed that looked like I-594 and Washington State had already passed I-591, we would have no constitutional recourse whatsoever. We would be required to follow the national standard, and we would have given up our 10th Amendment rights to the federal government as well as our own sovereignty. Now, I personally don't know about you guys, but I think that the federal government has enough power already. You know, I think that it's already too large and too out of control, and I think that passing a law that can create a problem for us later in order to fix a problem for us now is a bad idea. All we would be doing is kicking the can down the road and not solving the issue at hand. And this is why we should all vote no on I-591 and I-594. Anyway, so, you know, that was my letter that I wrote, or my post that I did on Facebook. And, you know, I have to just say, so many gun rights advocates that I agree on almost every other issue. So many gun rights advocates are in support of I-591. Even the Washington Gun Rights Coalition or something like that, or not coalition, Washington Gun Rights Organization out here. I can't remember what they're called, but if you type in Google I-591, they're the first one to pop up, and they are totally in support of 591. And, you know, the Second Amendment Foundation, they are in support of 591. I think they actually helped author this as well. You know, and I agree with them on so many issues. I'm not trying to, you know, create any political enemies here or step on anyone's toes, but I feel passionately about this. So passionately that I have to go against the grain. So many people are for I-591, and it's okay. You know, I know their reasoning, but I disagree with them. You know, and I-591, it's not a very long law. It's actually pretty short. I-594 is 18 pages, but I-591 is only a few sections. And I'll go ahead and read it to you guys in its entirety, and this will give you a heads up as to why so many gun rights advocates are for this law. And, okay, so here it goes. This law is an act relating to protecting gun and other firearms rights, adding new sections to the chapter 9.41 RCW and creating new sections. RCWs, in case you aren't aware, RCWs are basically the criminal code for Washington State. So all the laws out here, all the criminal laws and whatnot are RCWs. Okay, so here goes. Be it enacted by the people of the state of Washington. New section. Section 1. A new section is added to chapter, excuse me. A new section is added to Chapter 9.41 RCW to read as follows. It is unlawful for any government agency to confiscate guns or other firearms from citizens without due process. I agree with that. I'm 100% for that. The second section, it is unlawful for any government agency to require background checks on the recipient of a firearm unless a uniform national standard is required. I've already covered that. You guys understand my beef with that section. Section 3, the provision of this act are to be liberally construed to effectuate the intent, policies, and purposes of this act. Okay, so this section could basically say, hey, it wasn't our intent to allow a uniform national standard, but I disagree. I don't think that this would apply. I mean, let me... All right. Sorry about that, guys. Not really sure what happened there, but it looks like we disconnected, and typically that has been happening. So I tried to play a commercial, but it looks like I came back and everything was quiet. So I think we had some radio silence there for a while. So anyway, I apologize about that. We've been having nothing but problems here in regards to, you know, the internet connection here, and I've been having, I don't know if it's my internet or if it's Blog Talk Radio or what it is, but anyway, I apologize about that. I appreciate you guys, those of you who have stuck with us here. Anyway, so I want to talk more about I-591. So I think when we last left, I was talking about the intent. And, we've had, for 200 plus years, we've been having a debate over the Second Amendment and the intent of our founders with the Second Amendment. And we've seen how the left has construed it to mean that we only get these rights within a militia, and we only get these rights, a certain way, not within a city. We have all these restrictions that were put on it, even though it's clear as day written in the Second Amendment. We have the right to keep and bear arms uninfringed. How can you construe it any other way? It has the word uninfringed in it. So the fact is that I do not trust any law that is not clearly black and white on its intent. Putting this section of that, Section 2 of it, where we would be basically subject to a uniform national standard, it's upsetting to me because this would have been a good law otherwise. But anyway, I'm going to go forward into this here. So, Section 4, if any provision of this act or its application to any person or circumstance is held invalid, the remainder of the act or application of the provision to the other persons or circumstance is not affected. So, honestly, I really don't have a clue what this is talking about, but let's try to break this down. If any provision of this act or its application to any person or circumstance is held invalid, the remainder of the act or application of the provision to the person or circumstance is not affected. So basically, it falls within an exemption. So if you are exempt from this somehow, the entire act is exempt from you. So anyway, Section 5, this act is known and may be cited as the Protect Our Gun Rights Act. All right, so this is why so many people are pro I-591. I mean, just the language itself says that it's the Protect Our Gun Rights Act. I mean, you can clearly see why so many people are for this because, without researching, just looking at the name, just looking at it on its face there, it will show you that it's for gun rights, okay? And, I'm familiar with the people who wrote this, and I'm positive that they're well-intentioned, but I think they messed up, honestly. And I'm not judging them. I'm positive that their hearts were in the right place, but I think they made a mistake by including Section 2, where it basically acquiesces to the government on a national standard. This is something that I don't think that the government has any right to impose on the states, and I certainly don't think that we should put anything in the law that would make us subject to some kind of federal law. Anyway, so you can see with the language of I-591 that it's a very pro-gun initiative, and you can see how so many pro-gun right voters will be inclined to vote on it based solely on its name. For me, however, I value the entire Bill of Rights and not just the Second Amendment. I'm not just a two-way guy. I'm a Constitution guy. I'm a Bill of Rights guy. So I'm concerned with the ever-growing and expanding federal Leviathan. It has a tendency of just growing naturally. That's what governments do. They have a tendency of naturally growing through time. And it's up to each one of us, the citizenry, to actually fight actively, not only to educate ourselves, but our government officials, keep them at bay, hold their feet to the fire, and prevent the spread of the government's influence. So, this is something that I previously mentioned in my Facebook post, but, our founders, they had a deep mistrust of the federal government. This is something that our founders were extremely concerned about, and this is one reason why the Civil War was fought. This is why there was so much infighting regarding the Federalist and Anti-Federalist parties or papers where they were basically discussing the power of a centralized government and their concern because they had just left a monarch that had basically total control, total federal control, and they wanted to get as far away from that as possible. So, in order for me to explain why 591 is something that you should really oppose, I guess we need to start at the most basic level of understanding. So, in terms of sovereignty. So, what is state sovereignty? Most people don't really even know what sovereignty is nowadays. So, or why is it important? So, at the inception of the United States, each state was thought of as its own independent nation. All right. So, our founders, for example, they're quoted in historical texts. I mean, it's all over historical texts as referring to their states as their country. Jefferson has several quotes, and so many people, even Washington. Washington referred to Virginia as his country so many times. So it's important to make that distinction. Nowadays, people don't think of states as nations. That concept has slipped by the wayside. You hear state and you think of it as the state, Washington, Oregon, but you don't think about it as a nation state. But that's what they were. So the name United States of America, this should be the biggest clue to this fact. I mean, it says it in the name, the United States. So it's many states, nations coming together, united under one banner. All right? And according to dictionary.com, the definition of the word state, I believe this is the 7th definition, is a politically unified people occupying a definite territory, i.e. a nation. Okay? So the United States, it was never intended to be this one single nation ruled by a massive federal government. This was never its intention. It was the combination of many independent sovereign nations who came together united under one banner. The problem is that the federal government has incrementally stripped the states of their rights. And again, as enumerated in the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. This means that the federal government only has the powers given to them in the Constitution, and all other powers belong to the states, we the people. This means that the federal government can't just come in and tell each state how to run their government, because they don't have any authority to do so. These are independent nations. The federal government has no authority over every action of this nation. The only authority that the federal government has is the authority bestowed upon it by the Constitution. So if they want to increase their authority, they can do that. All they have to do is pass it in Congress and change it as an amendment to the Constitution. And that's a thing that the liberals, they don't like to do. Okay, they have no problem passing laws, but they don't want to ratify the Constitution because they know that nobody wants to go along with what they're openly talking about. They have to pass it through laws and impose their will federally on the states. And additionally, we run into a problem here with the federal government, because the problem is that the format of the Congress, the format of the Senate, for example, has actually changed, and we're going to get to that in a second. But one thing I just want to point out is that the only reason why the federal government was created is because it was meant to unify the nation by incentivizing trade between the states. If you are unfamiliar with the history, the United States was actually in a really tough spot after the Revolutionary War. There was so much manipulative action between states, and there were so many people that were basically fighting, and trying to cause problems for the other states in their trade. So the federal government, they hoped to basically incentivize trade between the states, several states, and actually get some kind of commerce going on instead of some kind of trade blocks or tariff imposed on each state from another state, which dramatically decreased the amount of trade and hurt the economy overall. And another reason why the federal government was created was to establish a mutual protection pact between the states with the use of a federal military fighting force to be used on foreign enemies, not domestically. They were very clear about the intention and how they were concerned about a standing army. And even the Constitution says that the army is not allowed to remain a standing army for more than a period of, I believe, if I'm correct, 2 years. However, the Navy could be maintained And currently, from what I understand, constitutionally speaking, I'm still learning about this issue, but from what I understand, we're currently in violation of the Constitution because we have a standing army. But I digress. This is going down another rabbit hole that I don't want to go down. But I want to talk about, the principle of sovereignty that you guys now understand and apply it to the 17th Amendment. You guys should basically understand the principle of sovereignty. So, as far as the 17th Amendment, if you're not familiar with the 17th Amendment, Americans for 125 years, they did not vote for their senators in the federal government. The Constitution, as it was adopted in 1788, stated that senators would be elected by state legislators, which means that the state governments would elect the federal senators, which would give the states representation in federal Congress. Excuse me. So the 17th Amendment, it was ratified on April 8th, 1913, and it reads, the states, I'm skipping all over here. Okay, the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. That's what the 17th Amendment says. So this is new. This was added in 1913. 125 years have passed, and the senators within the federal Senate, they were all elected by the state governments, but this changed it. Now it gave the people of each state the ability to vote for their representatives in the Senate. This is not the intention of this branch of government, first and foremost. But the 17th Amendment, it literally changed the face of the Senate. It used to represent the states in their interest, but now it represents the people. And the people, they already had representatives. They already had the House of Representatives. And the people now have double representation in Congress, and this was never our founders' intent. The states literally lost their voice in the federal government and their ability to affect change within the government. So let's say that, for example, that they actually did try to ratify the Constitution and increase federal power and usurp even more of the state's power. One would argue that, first of all, it's not necessary based on the 17th Amendment, but also it's not even possible anymore for the states to block it. Because before, it had to go through the Senate, which was elected by representatives from the state, okay? So the Senate, obviously, you look after the interest of the people who vote for you, okay, as an elected official. So the states obviously are telling their senators what to vote for, and the senators are listening because, hey, these are the people that elect me. The Senate, the states are the people who elect me, but you've changed who elected the senators to the people. So now the only thing that they cater to is the people. This has usurped the right, the right of sovereignty of the states, and it's created a problem. So anyway, the states, they lost their voice in the government, and states have rights. The federal government is not the ultimate authority. In fact, it's just one piece of a puzzle, and it was created under the assumption that it would have very limited authority. So let's move it back to I-591, all right? I-591, like I said, Section 2 of it says it is unlawful for any government agency to require background checks on the recipient of a firearm unless a uniform national standard is required. This statement gives up the state's right to govern itself on the issue, all right? If the federal government, if they decided to pass a law that would require background checks, there's nothing that the state could do. It's already written in the law. In reality, it usurps the state sovereignty and gives the federal government more power. This is not really that far-fetched of a possibility when you think about it, that the federal government could pass a law that will create more background check requirements and more red tape for law-abiding citizens. No one can tell you what the future will bring, certainly not myself, and anyone who does, you should be suspicious of. But I think that's even more of a reason why you should not vote for I-591, because they cannot tell you with any certainty that no federal laws regarding background checks will be passed. And anyway, this leads us to the next segment of the show, and we like to call it the Listener Challenge.
I challenge you to a duel. Did you hear that? Sounds like it's time for a challenge. Listener challenge. Listener challenge. Listener challenge. Listener challenge.
All right, this is a segment of the show where I challenge you to get out, get active, get on the move. And in this segment, I want to challenge you guys to vote. Get out there and vote in these upcoming November elections, and vote on the initiatives I've been talking about, I-591 and I-594. Your voice and your vote counts. We're talking a local, state-level election where it is so important for each one of us to get out there and vote. And not only that, but to educate our friends, our family, our coworkers, everyone we can about these initiative ballots and the candidates that are going to be involved in this election. Let your voice be heard. Don't sit idly by while the anti-gun extremists and good-intentioned gun rights supporters paint us into a corner. You know, we cannot afford either one of these initiatives to become a law. And I-594, I believe that it will have a devastating effect on the right to keep and bear arms in Washington State. And if it passes here, it's coming to your town, your state. Just be prepared. Even if it doesn't pass, they're not going to give up. The Bloomberg machine, the anti-gun extremist machine, it does not turn off. It just readjusts. It will come looking for your guns next. Anyway, I believe that I-591, it creates the potential for a federal law to do the very same thing that I-594 is designed to do, or worse. The fact is that both of these laws are bad, and we cannot afford to have either. Like many of you, I value the entire Bill of Rights, not just the Second Amendment. I value state sovereignty just as much as the right to keep and bear arms, and I refuse to sacrifice one for the other. That's this week's challenge. Stand up, speak out, and get on the move. Anyway, at this point, we're going to cut to a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the slavery debate that our founders found themselves thrusted in at the creation of this country. And if you guys would like to get involved, I'm more than happy to have you on. Please give us a call. The number to the show is 619-924-0986. Again, that is 619-924-0986. The Mack Pack phone lines are open.
Support On The Move. Help us make this podcast bigger and better. You can do this by going to our store and purchasing one of our hundreds of products. All designs are original and made for patriots like you. Just go to cafepress.com/onthemoveshow. We appreciate your support. Hi, I'm Latasha Worley, and I work with candidates to creatively and effectively communicate their message to voters. I offer professional graphic design services, from yard signs to flyers, from logos to vehicle magnets. Email me today at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com for a quote on items for your campaign.
Broadcasting from deep within occupied territory on the far left coast. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III. Stand up, speak out, and get on the move. And now your host, Mack Worley III.
Welcome back. The number to the show, if you want to join in, is 619-924-0986. Again, that's 619-924-0986. So I want to talk to you guys about the slavery debate that was had during the Revolutionary era. And some of my thoughts on it, you know, we have the benefit of hindsight. Obviously, all of us know now that slavery is abhorrent and it's one of the most universally wrong things that you can do to anyone. And with that said, I think it's important that we address this because, the left, they like to demonize our founding fathers and say that, they're all evil slave holders and that how could they not support freeing slaves? How could they oppress the black people for such a long period of time? How could people like Thomas Jefferson, who were renowned for the rights of man, how could they justify not giving African Americans or black people rights? How could they not see that stark difference of rights that these people have? How could they see these people as livestock or cattle? And it's a valid question, and it's something that I've often asked myself. And more specifically, I think you really have to understand a few basic tenets, a few basic principles when it comes to the creation of this country, okay? First and foremost, as I have already talked about, is the issue of sovereignty, okay? So each state was their own independent nation, all right? The federal government had limited scope and power, and it was newly created. It was just brand new, and it was basically in its infancy, and most people didn't even know if it would survive. So, any kind of situation that would make these sovereign states, nation states, get them upset and say, hey, you're not going to impose your will on me, federal government. You have no right to do that. We're out of here. We're going to leave the Union, all right? At the creation of the country, it's not like a civil war would have been possible. It would have been just a disbanding of the Union, and there would have been nothing that could have been done. And our founders, who were alive at this period of time, so we're talking 1790s, all right? Our founders were alive. Jefferson and Madison and Washington, they were part of these debates. Also Hamilton, which, by the way, Hamilton was a Federalist. He was all about the centralizing of power of the federal government. This guy was very pro big government, all right? And it amazes me that you can survive that period of time, the Revolutionary era, and be in America serving the people and still be for a centralized answer. After leaving the kind of tyranny that they left, I cannot imagine how anyone could be for big government, especially in that time period. But and just so you guys know, I'm totally off script here. I'm talking to you guys like we're just hanging out. So, my thought process on this whole thing, this whole issue in the past is I was like, well, how could they just not do something about it? They just make it illegal. Why wouldn't they do something? After educating myself more on the subject, that's the easy answer. That's yes, they could have just done something. Okay, so let's look at the real options that they could have had. Okay, because none of us were there first and foremost, and none of our founders had the hindsight to know what would have happened. And also the discussion of slavery, this was a kind of a newer topic. It hadn't been abolished in most places of the world, so this was something that society was used to seeing. This is something that could be defended based on saying, well, the British have done it, and even the Africans in which we enslave do it to themselves with tribal warfare. And one of the justifications that was made in 1790, I can't recall what congressman had said it, but they had basically said that the treatment that they would have received as slaves in Africa would have been substantially worse than the treatment that they receive here. So we are doing them, a mercy rather than harming them. That was the justification, which is, of course, outrageous. We all understand how ridiculous that is. But you have to understand the society. If you believe that, nurture versus nature, we are a product of our environment in the nurture aspect, or we are who we are because we were born to be that person in the nature aspect. I personally believe that we are a combination of both. And in terms of that, you have to understand the societal times. People didn't think about it in terms of it being wrong because it was something that they were just used to. And this was the beginning. This was the start of the conversation of how immoral the institution of slavery was, and how it stood directly in contrast to the Revolutionary era's ideas. All right? So, and those were brand new ideas. The idea of being able to self-govern, of individual liberty instead of collective liberties or collective goals or something along those lines. This is something that is remarkable in history. It's the first time that individuals got put ahead of the collective, of the herd. So you have to understand this is a big moment in history. A lot of societal changes are happening, and they started to realize after the Revolutionary era, hey, this institution of slavery, it stands directly against what we were trying to do with the Revolutionary War. And in fact, when Thomas Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence, if you didn't know, that was written by Thomas Jefferson. And, he spent, if I'm not mistaken, he spent a day or two locked in a hotel room, and or whatever it was at the time, it wasn't like they had a Motel 6 or something, but you get what I'm saying. He locked himself in, and he wrote and rewrote and drafted the Declaration of Independence. It was his work. The original argument that he had made actually included the defamation of the institution of slavery. I mean, he went after it. He said that it stands starkly against the revolutionary principles. So how can he justify that as well as the fact that he never actually released his slaves? He was a slaveholder. He never released his slaves. These are questions that I had myself, and even he thought that it was a bad institution. I don't know what his justifications were. Thomas Jefferson was extremely elusive, and he's one of our most elusive founding fathers as far as his rationale and things like that. He was just not a very open book. So anyway, he penned that out in the Declaration of Independence, and he basically stood directly against the institution of slavery. However, it was removed. The people who were revising it, I don't remember what group this was, but they basically took out the section of slavery from the Declaration of Independence. And they did so for a lot of different reasons. One reason in particular was that they wanted to focus it on the harm created by the crown, the King of England. And they wanted to be particularly direct to that. The Declaration of Independence was basically a letter to the king declaring our independence from him. They had the principle that, if we're going to declare independence, we need to tell the people we're declaring that we are independent and why, and basically tell them that we did everything in our power to redress our grievances. Anyway, so they changed it. They removed it. And we saw in the Constitutional Convention that they refused to address it then as well. So they did this because they knew that the country, newly formed, with independent sovereign nations underneath one banner, was in a delicate situation politically. All it would take for the Union to be disbanded or broken up into several fragments would be for some kind of infighting that they could not get past. And one of those topics was slavery. Slavery was so ingrained in the South that their economy really depended on it the way it was currently set up. And it was like this, and it was so profound in the South that it was part of their society. They would have defended that no matter what. It was more important to have the institution of slavery to the South than to be the United States of America. If they would have fought for it during the Constitutional Convention, the South would never have agreed to enter the Union, and then we would have seen maybe two nation states. We would have had the United States and the Southern Confederacy or something along those lines. Maybe we would have seen it then Who knows? It could have broken up into several nation states. I mean, we could have 5 or 6 different countries here in America. I mean, it could be even more or less. Who knows what would have happened? Maybe we would have, had some kind of hostilities and then more wars between nations, Who knows? Regardless, our founders thought it was more important to have everybody on the deal. So they included in the Constitution a provision which basically made it illegal for Congress to outlaw the institution of slavery up until a certain point. I believe it was 1808, if I'm not mistaken. So with that said, they basically alluded to slavery in the Constitution without specifically saying it. They would refer to others or other persons along those lines. They would never say the word slave because they wanted to avoid the word slavery. They didn't want to give it a foothold in the Constitution to where it could never be gone, but they also wanted to give the South some consideration to where they knew that it wasn't going to be taken away. But they had every intention of trying to, at least the North, the representatives in the Constitutional Convention from the North, they had every intention of gradually phasing out slavery. So this decision is one that we look at continuously through the prism of history. We're able to 20/20 hindsight, and we can say, man, that was awful. How could they have put slavery in the Constitution? How could they have protected slavery? That's just wrong, right? I mean, that stands starkly against the revolutionary principle, the Declaration of Independence. We're free people and we have the right to govern ourselves. We belong to ourselves. We control the government. A government cannot govern without the consent of the people. These are all, concepts at that time that were very prevalent. So how could they put it in? Well, like I said, I discussed that. And they had maybe 3 options here, okay? Number one, they could have done what they did, and we see the outcome now, all right? Led to the Civil War, 600,000 Americans died because of it, because they chose not to fight for it then. Or they could have decided to fight for it then, and the South would have never entered into the Union. And by the way, I have to point out the fact that the Constitution, it is a legal and binding contract. All right. So what this means is that it's a legal agreement that all of these sovereign nations entered in, and each term of the agreement, it was agreed upon, and they signed it. Representatives from each nation signed it, and this is a legal binding agreement. So it's just like any other contract. You start changing things in the contract after it's signed, you've made the contract null and void. If you start changing, different aspects of it, or not respecting, the rights of somebody in the contract as guaranteed by the contract, you violated the contract, and it's void. So this is why during the Civil War we saw the South secede from the Union. But we'll get back to that. I want to talk more about these other options. So, like I said, the first option is they did what they already did, and it led to the Civil War, and we see how that worked out. The second option is they oppose it, then they make sure that slavery is abolished upon the creation of the Constitution, in which case there's no way that the South would have entered into the Union, and they would have likely became their own nation state or states, in which case slavery would have been allowed to continue. So who knows if slavery would have ever ended, because they would have been their own country. There would have been no Civil War. Perhaps there would have been other wars, other subsequent wars that would follow. Who knows? We can't tell. But who knows what would have happened? I mean, slavery in the South could still be going on, potentially. Who knows? But the other option is they enter into the contract, allowing it, protecting it the way they did, and then they go back on their word and they change the way that they were doing things, and what we had agreed on, basically. So they enter into it and say, we're going to protect slavery, and then they suddenly centralize the federal government, get more power, and the federal government starts to impose laws on these independent states, these nation states. So if that happened, we would see the Civil War, the very exact same thing that happened in 1860 to 1865. I mean, this is exactly what happened. The federal government tried to change the contract. The only reason why the South entered into the Union to begin with was because that they were assured that the institution of slavery would be protected. And the North tried to change that deal. And even though we all can agree that it's evil, slavery is evil, it's a terrible institution, it's completely abhorrent, and we all should disagree with it. And I find it very unlikely that anyone out there would be a supporter of slavery nowadays. But the fact is, the federal government didn't have the right to tell the states how to govern. They didn't have the right. This wasn't a power given to them by the Constitution. As a reminder, I just want to read the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And let me get to that here. It says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Which means that if it's not specifically a power given to the federal government in the Constitution, then it's protected according to the Bill of Rights, the rights of each state. The Bill of Rights was included into the Constitution because, again, none of these states would have entered into the Union had they not had all of these rights guaranteed and enumerated by the Constitution. There was no way that they were going to allow a federal government to have that much control over their life, so they put all these restrictions upon the government. This is why the 10th Amendment is there to begin with. And, I just want to kind of touch a little bit about, how you hear liberals talking about how the Constitution is a living, breathing document that can be altered and amended to change, to actually, update to societal needs. All right. First and foremost, this is not what the liberals are trying to do. The liberals try to pass laws to usurp the Constitution. They don't try to amend it. And when they do so through trickery or deceit. They are not interested in trying to change the Constitution with the light of day on what they're trying to do. What they want to do is usurp it. What they want to do is try to take power away from it and gain their power. That's all they want to do. They're not interested in trying to actually amend the Constitution through the proper channels. So, secondly, here, the rights of the states are without question. The federal government has no authority to tell the states what they can do unless it's already in the Constitution. So, and as I said, the Bill of Rights, it's different than the rest of the Constitution. It's, the first of the 10th Amendment. These are rights guaranteed. You can change things in that living, breathing document known as the Constitution. 11th and on, you can add and amend and do things like that. But these rights, the Bill of Rights, these are guaranteed. These are self-evident rights that we all have. You can't change the First through the 10th Amendment. You can't change it. These are protections from the government. So the government obviously cannot change these rights. These are unalienable rights. These rights, you can't even give away yourself. If you don't want them, you can't give them away. They exist. You may not want to assert them, but they're still there. You still possess them. And according to the 10th Amendment, the states still possess their rights. So anyway, we see through the prism of history, we understand what happened. But, I challenge you to really ask yourself, what would you have done in this circumstance if you were a founder? Because obviously I've given this a great deal of thought myself. I was like, if I was there, this would be horrible. I would be against slavery, and boom, there we go. Anti-slavery movement at the revolutionary times, and all right, slavery's over. But it's not that simple. It's really not that simple. If you would have opposed slavery from the beginning and you would not have agreed to enter the United States or sign the Constitution, unless the institution of slavery was gone, the South would have never come around, the South would have never joined, and that would have been the end of it as far as the United States, including the South. So our founders were kind of in a tight spot. I mean, many of them did not support the institution of slavery. Many of them thought it was awful. Many of them, like Thomas Jefferson, was kind of conflicted. They said that they didn't support it, but yet they held slaves, and they never saw fit to release their slaves. it's a really interesting and difficult time in history. So, even if you were put back there with 20/20 hindsight, today, or then what you know today, and you were transported to 1776, what could you have done? What would you have done? I don't know. I personally don't know, and I completely understand why our founders did what they did. It was a different time and a different society, and it was just a different world, and they did what they felt they could. Many of them wanted to get rid of it, and many of them thought that this institution of slavery would go away on its own. So they figured, why bother fighting it and making a stand where it's going to be more of a divisive issue now than if we just let it die on its own. And, actually, one thought was that they would actually basically compensate slave owners from a gradual doing away with the institution of slavery. Eventually, they wanted to pass laws that would gradually make it illegal to own slaves, but they would do so through a series of laws, like first and foremost, like you're not able to import slaves. Then maybe they were hoping to make it so no slaves could be retained after they were, if they were born on a plantation or something, they couldn't be retained. And then eventually the population would go away, and then slavery would be illegal because you couldn't get new slaves to replace what you had. So this was their thought process, but they were hoping that they could compensate in areas that they had totally eliminated and outlawed slavery. In the future, they were hoping that they could make it so that they could pay and compensate these slave owners for their property, meaning people, human beings, slaves. They were hoping that the federal government could compensate these people for their slaves. And they waited until, I believe it was 1790, to get a census back, and they saw that the slave population had grown to the point of where it was not even possible to compensate these people. So that had already become a non-option. And then they also realized in 1790 that they were running out of time based on this feeling of the revolutionary spirit. They realized that they had a certain window of which people were holding on to this revolutionary idea, the idea taken from the Declaration of Independence, and they were running out of time because that feeling, that idea was slowly dissipating. It didn't have as much steam as it did in 1776. We're talking a different time. A different movement going on. You know how easy it is for things to fall out of the news. 1776, we're talking 14 years later, 1790, they're having this conversation for one of the first times openly in Congress because some Quakers started a petition and brought it to the Congress. And they had never openly discussed the institution of slavery up to that point. But this was the first time, and in fact, it actually was I'm not sure if it was the petition or there was another petition that went to the either the House or the Senate. I can't recall which House of Congress it was in. But regardless, Benjamin Franklin actually sponsored one of these petitions against slavery. And first and foremost, good on Benjamin Franklin. But it did create a need for them to actually talk about this for the first time in the open because out of all the founding fathers, out of all the people that could have potentially sponsored something, given it legitimacy, the only person that could have possibly been more influential than Benjamin Franklin at that time, 1790, was George Washington. I mean, it really, as soon as Benjamin Franklin put his name on that, it got legitimacy, and it started the conversation for the first time. And they decided not to violate the Constitution because the Constitution, stipulated specifically that it was no laws were to be passed by Congress, infringing on the ability of slave owners to have slaves or operate their plantations using slaves until I believe 1808. Now, I'm not reading that from the Constitution. I'm just kind of remembering it, so it's off the top of my head there. But anyway, this is where they were at that time. They couldn't violate the Constitution because it was specifically in there. And all of them, as you all know, are sworn to uphold the Constitution. They swore an oath to that document. Whether or not they agree or disagree with it, they all were under the assumption that at some point slavery was going to dissipate, and that assumption was wrong. They didn't realize that slavery was going to continue to grow, and the hostilities between the North and the South based on this would continue to grow, ultimately leading to the Civil War, which ultimately resulted in 600,000 Americans dead. And I wonder if they knew that at the time, if that would have changed any of their minds. Their inability to address the institution of slavery would have led to 600,000 people dying. And I'm sure you all have heard, the Civil War was about slavery. Civil War was about slavery. Yes and no. It was about slavery in terms of the federal government. They wanted to prevent the South from being able to have slaves. Yes, that's accurate. But the way the South saw it is that we're independent nations. You even agreed that we could have the institution of slavery upon entering into the Union. The Constitution is a contract, and you're trying to change the contract. So anyway, we're going to come back more, and we're going to talk more about the situations leading up to the Civil War, and more thoughts on slavery as well. So we're going to cut to a quick commercial break. I appreciate you guys sticking with us. Don't go anywhere.
Support On The Move. Help us make this podcast bigger and better. You can do this by going to our store and purchasing one of our hundreds of products. All designs are original and made for patriots like you. Just go to cafepress.com/onthemoveshow. We appreciate your support. Hi, I'm Latasha Worley, and I work with candidates to creatively and effectively communicate their message to voters. I offer professional graphic design services, from yard signs to flyers, from logos to vehicle magnets. Email me today at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LAGOSHA Worley@gmail.com for a quote on items for your campaign.
Broadcasting from deep within occupied territory on the far left coast. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III. Stand up, speak out, and get on the move. And now your host, Mack Worley III.
And we're back. All right. Feel free to call in, guys, if you want to pipe in here. The number to the show is 619-924-0986. Again, that's 619-924-0986. Or you can email the show at talk@onthemoveshow.com. And anyway, we were talking about slavery. We were talking about the institution of slavery, the complications and the difficulties that our founders had in regards to fighting that and trying to basically incrementally get the institution of slavery to go away. And they were operating underneath the assumption that it would just eventually die out and it wouldn't be a problem and they wouldn't have to ever address it directly. They were wrong. That led to the Civil War. The institution of slavery continued to grow and grow and grow, and more slaves were abundant in the South. And the Southern economy grew more and more dependent on this. People held firmer to the ideology that slavery was a requirement, and they even justified it as it being a mercy. And they even started bubbling to the surface some of the comments, the racist comments in regards to the black race itself. Abraham Lincoln is actually quoted directly as saying that, as long as there is a white race and a black race, and I'm paraphrasing roughly here, But it's in an encyclopedia. Look it up yourself if you do not believe me. But Lincoln, the one who is supposed to have been the savior of the black race, all right, the one who freed the slaves, all right, Lincoln's on record saying that as long as there's a black race and a white race, one of them will be the superior and one of them will be the subordinate, and he's of the opinion that the white race should remain the superior. So this is something that many people don't know about, many people don't talk about, but I feel it's important that we address. And it's also important to note that the North, they actually had slaves. There were a lot of slaves in the North, and they didn't really have a problem with the institution of slavery up until the point when they could no longer make money. I mean, there was still an abolitionist movement that was going on in the North, but it gained a whole lot of steam when they weren't able to make any money off of it from the importing of slaves through the North Atlantic slave trade. And this is something that was actually prevented. After a period of time, the North, who are the people who were bringing in slaves for the South, were prevented from actually bringing them in anymore. So when they no longer saw any profit in it, they suddenly all jumped on the abolitionist train. Okay, so don't think that the North is totally blameless in this. There were very, very many slaves, thousands of them in the North as well. The numbers were dwarfed significantly by those in the South, but they still participated in the institution of slavery. So anyway, leading to the Civil War, like I said, these independent nations in the South, they were concerned with the fact that the federal government was trying to eliminate their ability to own slaves, and they felt that the federal government had no authority to do so. They had entered into a contract where it was agreed upon that they would be allowed to retain slavery in the institution, and then after the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln did, freeing all slaves, they'd finally had enough. And even before that point, when it was alluded to by Lincoln that this was something that was going to happen, they had already started to secede from the Union at that point and say, hey, you violated the terms of our agreement, our contract, so that contract is null and void. So we're going to just go our separate ways and disband from the Union. They had every right. States have every right to do that. So the issue is for the South anyway, is less about slavery, but more about the government imposing its will when it has no right to. The central federal government had no authority to tell the states constitutionally how to govern themselves. They had no authority, no right, but they did so anyway, violating the Constitution, which, by the way, they swore an oath to uphold and defend, but they did so because they felt that it was for the greater good. And, again, I agree, slavery is horrible, but how do you approach this issue? How do you deal with it? All the choices that we talked about already, that none of them, there was no real good outcome. And we're talking about the greatest minds in history all working together to try to solve this problem. They couldn't do it. They were a heck of a lot smarter than I am. I don't know about you, but they were way smarter than me. So most of these people nowadays would be considered geniuses just based off of the sheer amount of knowledge that they possessed on so many different topics. But yet, they couldn't solve it. And it was a very big issue. As horrible as the institution of slavery is and was, there was nothing that they could do at the time. They thought that their inaction would ultimately lead to the institution just going away. And they were wrong. So the South started to secede from the Union, and Lincoln, he's even quoted as saying that he wasn't sure if he had the legal authority, the constitutional authority, or he was pretty sure he didn't, and to actually, go to war against the South to keep the Union together. He didn't think that he had this authority, but he did it anyway. A man who was sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution violated the Constitution for the greater good because he felt that he was morally and ethically bound to do something. But he didn't have the authority to do it, and the South knew that. They seceded, the Civil War ensued, and this was not, this was the reestablishing, the reunification of the Union. it was not something that it was done so by bureaucrats or people, deciding to enter into the Union. Again, the Declaration of Independence, that principle, okay, a government cannot govern without the consent of its people. What we saw during the Civil War was a conquering of sovereign nations. Though the moral and ethical reasons behind it were justified, historically speaking, through the prism of history, we know that that slavery was abhorrent and it's bad, but still, what other options could Lincoln have done? Perhaps he could have let them go, and then they wouldn't have been their problem. They decided to leave the country. He could have let them leave the country, which they had the absolute right to do, but then he decided to impose his will on those independent sovereign nations, and it was something that he didn't have the authority to do. Some would argue that it was a good thing. Others would argue that it's a bad thing. I think that it created the foundation for federal expansion. Not to mention, when the South was literally militarily conquered, governors were put in place there that would basically acquiesce to the North's demands. And if they didn't, they were removed at the point of a gun and a new one was put in. This is called a military coup, by the way. If one country invaded another country and then at gunpoint demanded that its leader did what that other country wanted, and then if the leader said, no, I'm not going to do that, and they removed him from power and put somebody else in, that's called a military coup. And that's what happened. The Civil War is ultimately about state sovereignty and the federal government imposing its will on independent sovereign nations. And after the Civil War, this is why we've gotten to the point where we're so far away from understanding state sovereignty and from the intention of our founders as far as having a small centralized government. We've gotten so far off the rails. We've moved so far away from what we were supposed to have been, where we were supposed to be at, that this country is literally unrecognizable. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and cut to a commercial break. And when we get back, I got some other information that I want to talk about. If you guys liked what I was talking about, please give me a call. I'm definitely interested to hear if you guys like these kind of analytical deep dives on historical conversations, different kind of analyzing on these kind of topics. I don't know what you guys think about this, so I'd like to hear some feedback from you. You can either call us 619-924-0986, or you can email the show at talk@onthemoveshow.com. I would really appreciate it if you give me your take on it. I'd like to know if this is something that I should continue really getting involved as far as breaking down the history, and if this is something that you guys are actually interested in. And if not, we can report the news and all that and give you my take on that kind of stuff. But I'm just curious to know what you guys, members of the Mack Pack, would actually like and what you want to hear more about. So anyway, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere, guys. We're going to start covering more stuff on the news when we get back.
Support On The Move. Help us make this podcast bigger and better. You can do this by going to our store and purchasing one of our hundreds of products. All designs are original and made for patriots like you. Just go to cafepress.com/onthemoveshow. We appreciate your support. Hi, I'm Latasha Worley, and I work with candidates to creatively and effectively communicate their message to voters. I offer professional graphic design services from yard signs to flyers, from logos to vehicle magnets. Email me today at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com for a quote on items for your campaign.
Broadcasting from deep within occupied territory on the far left coast, you're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III. Stand up,
We're back. Okay, so I promised you guys some news, so we're going to get to that here. You all may know how I feel about the Federal Reserve. I've talked about it before, but it bears repeating. I'm not a big fan of the Federal Reserve, and neither were our founders. They had never intended for a central bank to be in control of our monetary fund, our currency. And if you guys would like to join today's conversation and talk about it, please do. I'm happy to have you on, 619-924-0986. Again, 619-924-0986. Or you can email the show at talk@onthemoveshow.com. Anyway, one thing I want to point out is the fact that this Federal Reserve that is neither federal nor does it contain any reserves, it is controlled by elite corporate bankers who we have no oversight on. They control our currency, which is dangerous, but they are not elected representatives. No one elects them. They are elected within themselves, appointed, and we have no oversight of this Federal Reserve. Anyway, it's been said, and a lot of people would like to see the Federal Reserve actually get audited so we can find out what's actually going on in the Federal Reserve. It has never been audited. We have no idea what they're doing. And Congress has tried to get some kind of support for the Federal Reserve, and you have the conspiracy theories that JFK may have been assassinated because he was looking into the Federal Reserve and trying to get us back to the gold standard and whatnot. And I'm not going to dive too far into that, but it must be said that the Federal Reserve contains so much power and influence that most politicians will actually not even try to have us look at the Federal Reserve. And I think this is something that we absolutely need to discuss, because it is just ridiculous that we are allowing corporate bankers to basically have full control over our monetary system, and we're not even looking into it. We can't even see what they're doing with our money. This is our money. This is public money. It belongs to all of us. Why don't we know what the heck is going on inside this Federal Reserve? And I want to point out some hypocrisy that I see, and you see this kind of stuff all the time. You see somebody who's, for example, I like to pick on Harry Reid because, first of all, he's a stinking commie, socialist, liberal, Marxist, progressive, and for me, I have a fundamental disagreement with Harry Reid on almost every issue. Not only do I think he's wrong, but I also think he's just a bad overall guy. I don't think he's a very pleasant person. So Harry Reid, he's full of controversies and he's full of inconsistencies. Throughout his career, he supported things, and then when he had the opportunity to do it on someone else, he did it on them. For example, the nuclear option with the filibuster. We all know that Harry Reid was so adamantly opposed to the Republicans when they were in power, and they had threatened to use the filibuster option, the nuclear option, against the filibuster, making it so that only a majority was required to vote to override someone's ability to filibuster an issue. Only a majority, as opposed to the supermajority, the two-thirds vote that was required. So you had to have a supermajority to get past a filibuster. Well, Harry Reid was totally against it when the Democrats were the minority in Congress, and suddenly when they are the majority in the Senate, he has absolutely no problem using this. He says, "Hey, this is a great thing," but before he was against it when he was the minority. He said that it would have been a detriment to our country and to our republic and all that good stuff. But it didn't hold true when he's the one able to impose his will on the minority. So we see again Harry Reid. He's not allowing a vote on the audit of the Fed. He's not allowing our Congress to even vote on whether or not we should audit the Federal Reserve. Won't even let them vote on it. But I have a video here pulled out from the archives, and it's a video from Harry Reid adamantly saying that we should audit the Federal Reserve. His own words, everyone. Here he is.
The Senator from Nevada. Mr. President, I would like to extend my congratulations to the Senator from North Dakota course, for authoring this amendment, which I am a sponsor, but more importantly, for speaking out about the Federal Reserve for years. I have sponsored legislation that would call for an audit of the Federal Reserve System. I offer that amendment every year. Every year, the legislation gets nowhere.
And by the way, this speech was done on January 23rd, 1995. And we see a rather young and dapper-looking Harry Reid on the microphone here. So anyway, he was for it then. He's not even letting them vote for it now. Let's continue to hear what he has to say about it.
I think it would be interesting to know about the Federal Reserve. I think we should audit the Federal Reserve. It's taxpayers' money that's being used there.
Support On The Move. Help us make this podcast bigger and better. You can do this by going to our store and purchasing one of our hundreds of products. All designs are original and made for patriots like you. Just go to cafepress.com/onthemoveshow. We appreciate your support. Hi, I'm Latasha Worley, and I work with candidates to creatively and effectively communicate their message to voters. I offer professional graphic design services, from yard signs to flyers, from logos to vehicle magnets. Email me today at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com for a quote on items for your campaign.
Broadcasting from deep within occupied territory on the far left coast. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III. Stand up, speak out, and get on the move. And now your host, Mack Worley III.
Sorry, everyone. We had some technical difficulties once again. This is the first time we've had two on one show, and I apologize. I got to figure out what's going on with my internet connection here because this is getting quite ridiculous. Anyway, we were talking about Senator Harry Reid and his flip-flopping on the issue of auditing the Federal Reserve. We were listening to his speech on the Federal Reserve and his inconsistencies of where he stood then and where he stands now. We'll go ahead and continue the video.
Their body. But even though there is no entity in the world that controls our lives more than the Federal Reserve System, his speeches go unnoticed, I'm sorry to say. People just don't care, it seems, about the Federal Reserve. Maybe it's because it's a subject that isn't very interesting. You know, it's not pornography. It's not murder. It's not an issue that deals with the Wild West, water, grazing. It doesn't deal with issues that...
By the way, he mentioned water, grazing, Wild West. This happens to be a subject that Harry Reid is very fond of if you are familiar with the Bundy Ranch situation.
We talk about here a lot. But we don't talk enough about the Federal Reserve and the impact it has on our lives. So I acknowledge the work that my friend from North Dakota has done on this issue, and I am sorry that his very lucid statements have received very little attention. I was thinking as...
It's funny that he mentioned lucid statements. I don't believe that Harry Reid has made one lucid statement since 1995, but I digress.
The senator from North Dakota was outlining the secrecy of the Federal Reserve System that maybe what we should do, the Central Intelligence Agency has received a lot of criticism lately of not doing a real good job. One reason maybe is that they're not secret enough in some of the things they do. Maybe we should combine them with the Federal Reserve Board. What the Federal Reserve Board does, nobody knows what they're doing. CIA, it seems that everyone has some idea what they're doing. So maybe we could combine the two. It might not be a bad idea. Mr. President, the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates 6 times since February of 1994. If someone likes this legislation, generally speaking, that is, we're going to try to stop unfunded mandates, then they should love this amendment. If the principle of unfunded mandates being stopped sounds good to senators, then they should jump with joy and run over here and co-sponsor this legislation, because this really overshadows all other unfunded mandates, because these go on all the time. Not only do they affect government because of the money that governments borrow, but it also affects the private sector significantly. There isn't a person that's listening to this debate or could listen to the debate that higher interest rates doesn't impact them. Doesn't matter if they're homeless or they're making a multi-million-dollar transaction on Wall Street as we speak. Higher interest rates affects everybody in this country. And what we're saying is that the Federal Reserve Board would provide a report to Congress and to the President about anticipated costs of changes in interest rates on the public and private sectors. All we're aware of each time the Fed raises interest rates is we pay more. We should have a little more foundation as to what really we do pay. This amendment requires the Fed to prepare a report. This report will detail the costs imposed by interest rate changes within 30 days after the Fed decision to change such rates. The report will include an analysis of the aggregate costs that interest rate changes would impose on federal and state and local governments. We'll provide a cost analysis of interest rate changes on private sector borrowing. This, Mr. President, will allow us to see the increases in borrowing costs for consumers, small businesses, homeowners, and commercial lenders. I am glad that there has been a roll call vote called on this matter. I think it's important, if people are in favor of doing away with unfunded mandates, that they support the largest unfunded mandate we have in America today.
Anyway, that was Harry Reid talking about how much he supports auditing the Federal Reserve, which, as we know, he will not even allow a vote on it nowadays. So what's changed? What happened? Why does he no longer think this is a big issue? Is it because he's more concerned with bigger, more sexy issues like pornography or Wild West issues such as, you know, these cattle grazers, these darn cattle grazers that refuse to pay their dues, that even though they've grazed on this property for, you know, over 100 years, doesn't matter. This is a sexy issue to him, and this is what he finds important. So, for me, I believe that Harry Reid has been corrupted. I believe that something along the way has changed Harry Reid's mind, and he's decided that it's no longer important either for the country or for his own good to not audit the Federal Reserve. He's now standing in opposition to this audit, which he so steadfastly supported in 1995 and the years subsequent to that. You know, I think this just goes to show you that there's, not even just within the Democratic Party, but within all parties, there is a huge amount of hypocrisy, you know, a staggering amount of hypocrisy that just cannot be addressed in one show. The fact is that these people, they don't personally care about what's best for the country or for the republic. They only care what's best for their party or themselves and their own political power. So with that said, I think it's important that we all contact our representatives, let them know that you demand an audit on the Federal Reserve. You want to know what the heck is going on in there and what is happening with your money. Anyway, I have another conversation here that I would like to talk about. We got about 13 minutes left in the show, and I want to cover some more news. Not too long ago, Kroger had an issue with the MDA group, the Bloomberg-funded anti-gun extremist group known as Moms Demand Action. The grocery store Kroger, they ended up actually kicking MDA off of their property, and it was because MDA was bullying their customers. Okay, so, and this is an article written by Eric Reed on buzzpo.com, buzzpo.com. He writes, "It seems as if Moms Demand Action are turning up the heat on Kroger as they were protesting in front of a Michigan store. Kroger kicked Moms Demand Action right off their property, though. This escalation has been going on for several weeks now, with MDA now purchasing ads and billboards with Bloomberg bucks. Michael Bloomberg, the infamous and notorious anti-gunner who thinks it's perfectly acceptable for his security to have guns and him to be surrounded and completely isolated and protected by such people. But he does not believe, and these are my words now I'm saying, he does not believe that it's something that you personally have a right to that protection. He thinks that he has the right to it, but you don't. Not to mention this is the same sorry sack that decided that a big gulp from a convenience store should be outlawed in the state of New York. So it's pretty ridiculous. And I'm sorry, the city of New York. But it's pretty ridiculous. This guy thinks that the nanny state knows best and that he can tell you how to live your life and that you should just be okay with living under his rule, his dominion. And you know what? You don't really have any rights. The government can tell you what's best for you. It doesn't matter if you're not violating any laws or hurting anyone else. There's no victim. The government can tell you what you can put into your body. You don't have the right to decide. It's the government nanny state's job to make sure that you are okay and to make decisions for you because they know best, apparently. Anyway, the article went on to say that not to mention the social media hate campaign that they've embarked on against Kroger. And it's not just Kroger. Again, this is my words now. I'm deviating from the article once again. It's not just been Kroger. Any company at all that refuses to completely ban firearms from their stores, the MDA has basically been harassing through coordinated and Bloomberg-funded attacks through social media. Target was one of the ones that were getting targeted. No pun intended there. Anyway, the MDA, they would basically start blasting Target's website, their Facebook, and leaving comments like, I will not bring anybody in there in your store. I refuse to shop there until you prevent people from having guns in your store. And they're basically trying to make it a gun-free zone. They're trying to make it so that the law-abiding citizens cannot carry. And in fact, the hypocrisy of these idiots from Moms Demand Action, it's just staggering. It's just ridiculous. In fact, some of the comments from these anti-gunners are incredibly homophobic, for one, and I'll get to that in a second. But also, they don't even make sense based on the arguments that they're trying to portray. That one person said, if I saw you in Target with a firearm, I'd shoot you myself. Well, you're trying to say that you would have a gun in Kroger? I thought you didn't want guns in Kroger or Target or these stores in general. The fact is that some of these people, they're claiming to be concealed carry permit holders, or what I like to call sunshine patriots. What I believe C.J. Grisham, you guys may be familiar with from Open Carry Texas, he likes to call these people butters. I support the Second Amendment, but, and then insert their excuse for infringing on the right to keep and bear arms there. But anyway, I digress. As far as the homophobic hate speech that they have, they refer to open carriers or pro-gun advocates as ammosexuals. Ammosexuals. So first of all, what the hell is an ammosexual? But second of all, why do they feel the need to use a derogatory term towards gun owners that basically implicates them as being homosexuals? And this is something that I find staggering, because the left is supposed to be the party of homosexuals, basically. I mean, this is their platform is all about equal rights, equal marriage rights, things like that. But yet they don't actually support what they say. You know, I believe the Libertarian Party is probably the most on point in terms of this, you know, supporting the rights of gays to marry and whatnot. But the act of calling somebody a ammosexual, I believe, is incredibly homophobic. You know, if you are a homosexual, I don't care. Whatever, it doesn't matter. And using that as a derogatory term against someone shows how much hate and disrespect that these people actually have towards the homosexual community. So that's just my 2 cents on it. Anyway, back to the article here. Kroger has been solid at standing their ground up to this point. Our policy is consistent with what it has been all along, that we will follow the state's regulations, and we don't have a policy for Kroger at all. What that means is that if the state allows open carry or the carry of concealed handguns or anything for that matter, they will not go above and beyond what state laws have on the books. They're not going to create anything in addition to the law of the state. I think that's great. More power to them. I hope they've held firm. I haven't been following this story lately. This last I heard about this. This story was pulled about a week ago. I was going to use it on another show, but we ran out of time. So I'm interested actually to see what's happened on this. If you guys have any information on it, please call in. We've got about 6 minutes left in the show. 619-924-0986. Anyway, just last month, and this was, again, a little dated here. So Kroger spokesman Keith Daly stated, millions of customers are present in our busy grocery stores every day, and we don't want to put our associates in a position of having to confront a customer who is legally carrying a gun. That's a great policy. I mean, first of all, enacting some kind of policy like this would force their employees to actually confront somebody with a gun. Hey, you know, we have a policy, blah, blah, blah. You can't be in the store. And let's just point out the fact that if somebody was in the store with a gun with the intent to do harm or rob, some kind of malicious intent, approaching them to tell them to leave is only going to put them in harm's way. But more importantly, I think it's important to address the fact that most people who are open carrying a gun aren't participating in crime. Most crimes, in fact, I have been looking. I have yet to find one stinking crime out there that started where somebody was openly carrying a firearm for any period of time other than to go immediately commit a crime. So they're not out there walking around doing shopping with a firearm strapped to their hip or slung over their shoulder. That's not happening. You know, the people that are doing that are law-abiding citizens. The people that rush in with guns and start immediately pointing them at people, those are the people that are a threat. Those are the criminals, and a policy within a store is not going to prevent those people from entering with a gun. Anyway, he went on to say, again, this is Keith Daly, the Kroger spokesperson, we know that our customers are passionate on both sides of the issue, and we trust them to be responsible in our stores. Well said, brother. Anyway, Michigan Mad Mom leader Linda Brundage stated, "You don't need a gun to buy a box of cereal." Kroger would not be breaking any laws by saying to their customer, "Leave your guns locked in the car." However, and this is me again saying here, that's pretty foolish. It's an easy way for you to get your gun stolen by leaving it into the car. In fact, a store policy with that in mind, it could lead to criminals targeting cars in Kroger parking lots in the hopes that they could come up on a gun, basically, and have a stolen gun. Anyway, back to the article. But on September 8th, according to Breitbart News, a man in Indianapolis Kroger parking lot was accosted by an armed man in an apparent carjacking attempt. When police arrived, the attacker was fatally wounded and the law-abiding citizen remained unharmed. Had this citizen not been armed and able to defend his life, which is what the MDA, Moms Demand Action, is advocating for, the law-abiding citizen would probably be pushing up daisies right now. That's the article. Anyway, I think that it's important that we all keep this in the front of our mind. These kind of groups, these political action groups, are targeting companies and trying to put pressure on them in a fabricated way. I mean, most of these people are being paid and funded by the Bloomberg organization and organizations that are funded by his kind of money, the anti-gun extremist money. And they have billions of dollars at their hands, and they can afford to pay people to post all day long on the internet and basically harass these businesses on their social media and make them think that there's a groundswell of people that want them to act when in fact there is not, and it's just these organizations trying to manipulate and troll these companies to influence them and to basically usurp the debate, to change the conversation. That they know they can't get this stuff done by ratifying the Constitution because no one would support it. They know they can't get this stuff done by being open about it. They have to go about it in the most shady way possible, and we all need to be aware of this. And we need to discuss this. This information needs to get out. So I recommend that you guys please share this information with as many people as possible. So anyway, that is today's show. I want to thank each and every one of you, our listeners, for taking the time and to get involved. Members of the Mack Pack, I really do appreciate you all for tuning in. And I just want to say, if you guys made it to this point in the program, please do me a favor and click the share button. Share this this podcast with as many people. Share this podcast with as many people as you can. Get this show out. Try to help us build our audience. It's important that this kind of stuff is discussed and that we all are aware of it. So please, 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 please share our information on your social media sites. Anyway, we really do appreciate your continued support, and thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to check us out at our website, OnTheMoveShow.com. You can follow us here at blogtalkradio.com/OnTheMoveShow. You can like us on Facebook.com/OnTheMoveShow, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, YouTube.com/OnTheMoveShow. You can also follow us on Twitter, Twitter.com/OnTheMoveShow, or at OnTheMoveShow, and we would certainly appreciate that. And as always, know your rights, assert your rights, and get on the move.